Today we'll be reading an excerpt from Captain Canot, or 20 Years of an African Slaver, by Theodore Canot, edited from his journals by Brant Mayer. Chapter 10. I was a close watcher of Mongo John whenever he engaged in the purchase of slaves. As each Negro was bought before him, Ormond examined the subject without regard to sex, from head to foot. A careful manipulation of the chief muscles, joints, armpits, and groins was made to assure soundness. The mouth, too, was inspected and if a tooth was missing, it was noted as a defect liable to deduction. Eyes, voice, lungs, fingers, toes were not forgotten, so that when the Negro passed from Mongo's hands without censure, he might have been readily adopted as a good life by the insurance company. Upon one occasion, to my great astonishment, I saw a stout and apparently powerful man discarded by Ormond as utterly worthless. His full muscles and sleek skin, to my unpracticed eye, denoted the height of robust health. Still, I was told that he had been medicated for market with bloating drugs and sweated with powder and lemon juice to impart a gloss to his skin. Ormond remarked that these jockey tricks are as common in Africa as among horse dealers in the Christian lands, and desiring me to feel the Negro's pulse, I immediately detected disease or excessive excitement. In a few days, I found the poor wretch abandoned by his owner, a paralyzed wreck in the hut of a villager in Bangalore. When a slave becomes useless to his master in the interior or exhibits signs of failing constitution, he is soon disposed of to a peddler or a broker. These men call to at their aid a quack familiar with drugs, for who a small compensation undertakes to refit an impaired body for the temptation of greenhorns. Sometimes the cheat is successfully effected, but experienced slavers detect it readily by the yellow eye, swollen tongue, and feverish skin. Chapter 11. At the appointed day, La Fortuna sailed with 220 human beings packed into her hold. 3 months afterwards, I received advices that she had safely landed 217 in the Bay of Matanas, and that their sale yielded a clear profit of the voyage of $41,488. As I am now fairly embarked in the trade which absorbed so many of my most vigorous years, I suppose the reader will not loathe to learn a little of my experience in the alleged cruelties of this commerce. And the first question, in all likelihood, that rises to his lips is a solicitation to be appraised of the embarkation and treatment of slaves on the dreaded voyage. An African factor of fair repute is ever careful to select his human cargo with consummate prudence, as to not only to supply his employers with athletic laborers, but to avoid any taint of disease that may affect the slaves in their transit to Cuba or the American main. 2 days before embarkation, the head of every male and female is neatly shaved, and if the cargo belongs to several owners, each man's brand is impressed on the body of the respected Negro. This operation is performed with pieces of silver wire or small irons fashioned to the merchant's initials, heated just hot enough to blister without burning the skin. When the entire cargo is the venture of one proprietor, the branding is always dispensed with. On the appointed day, the barracoon, or slave pen, is made joyous by abundant feed, which signals the Negro's last hours in his native country. The feast over, they are taken alongside the vessel in canoes. As they touch on the deck, they are entirely stripped, so that women and men go out of Africa as they came in, naked. This precaution, it will be understood, is indispensable, for perfect nudity during the whole voyage is the only means of securing cleanliness and health. In this state, they are immediately ordered, the men to the hold and the women to the cabin, while boys and girls are day and night kept on deck, with their sole protection from the elements, a sail, and in fairer weather, and a tarpaulin in foul. At mealtime, they are distributed in messes of 10. This over, a bucket a bucket of salt is served with each mess by way of finger glasses for the ablation of hands, after which a kid, either of rice, farina, yams, or beans, according to the tribal habit of the Negroes, is placed before the squad. In order to prevent greediness or inequality in the appropriation of nourishment, the process is performed by signals from monitor, whose motions indicate when the darkies shall dip and when they shall swallow. It is the duty of the guard to report immediately whenever a slave refuses to eat, in order that his abstinence may be traced to stubbornness or disease. Negroes have sometimes been found in slavers who attempted to voluntary starvation, so that when the watch reports that the patient to be shaming his appetite is stimulated by the medical antidote of a cat. If the slave, however, is truly ill, he is forthwith ticketed for the sick list by a bead or a button around his neck, and is dispatched to an infirmary in the forecastle. These meals occur twice daily, at 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, and they are terminated by another ablation. Thrice in each 24 hours, they are served with a half pint of water. Pipes and tobacco are circulated economically among both sexes, but as each Negro cannot be allowed a luxury of a separate bowl, boys are sent round with an adequate supply, allowing a few whiffs to each individual. On regular days, probably 3 times a week, their mouths are carefully rinsed with vinegar, while nearly every morning a dram is given as an antidote to scurvy. Although this is found necessary to keep the sexes apart, as they are not allowed to converse. Although it is found necessary to keep the sexes apart, they are allowed to converse freely during the day while on deck. Corporal punishment is never inflicted save by an order of an officer, and even then, not until the culprit understands exactly why it is done. Once a week, the ship's barber scrapes their chins without assistance from soap, and on the same day, their nails are closely pared to ensure security from harm in those nightly battles that occur, when the slave contests with his neighbor every inch of plank to which he is glued. During the afternoons of serene weather, men, women, girls, and boys are allowed to unite in African melodies, which they always enhance by exemplarious tom-tom on the bottom of the tub or tin kettle. These hints will apprise the reader that the greatest care, compatible with safety, is taken of a Negro's health and cleanliness on the voyage. In every well-conducted slaver, the captain, the officers, the crew are alert and vigilant to preserve the cargo. It is their personal interest as well as the interest of humanity to do so. The boatswain and innocents in his patrol of purification and disinfecting substances are plenteously distributed. The upper deck is washed and swabbed daily. The slave deck is scraped and holystoned. And at 9 o'clock each morning, the captain inspects every part of his craft so that no vessel, except a man of war, can compare with a slaver in systemic order, purity, and neatness. I am not aware that I am not aware that the ship fever, which sometimes decimates the immigrants from Europe, has ever prevailed in these African traders. At sundown, the process of stowing the slaves for the night has begun. The second mate and boatswain descend into their hold, whip in hand, and range the slaves in their regular places. Those on the right side of the vessel facing forward and lying in each other's lap, while those on the left side are similarly stowed with their faces towards the stern. In this way, each Negro lies on his right side, which is considered preferable for action of the heart. In allotting places, particular attention is paid to size, the taller being selected for the greatest berth of the vessel, while the shorter and younger are lodged near the bows. When the cargo is large and When the cargo is large and the lower deck crammed, the supernumeraries are disposed of on deck, which is securely covered with boards to shield them from moisture. The strict discipline of the nightly stowage is, of course, of the greatest importance to the slavers, else every Negro would accommodate himself as if he were a passenger. In order to ensure perfect silence regularly during the night, a slave is chosen as constable from ten and furnished with a cat to enforce commands during his appointed watch. In remuneration for his services, which may be believed are admirably performed, whether the whip is required, he is adorned with an old shirt and tarry trousers. Now and then, billets of wood are distributed among the sleepers, but this luxury is never granted until the good temper of the Negroes is ascertained, for slaves have often been tempted to mutiny by the power of arming themselves with these pillows from the forest. It is very profitable to many of the, excuse me, it is very probable that many of the readers will consider it barbarous to make slaves lie down naked upon board. But let me inform you that the Africans are not familiar with the use of feather beds, nor do any but the free and rich in their motherly country indulge in the luxury of even a mat or raw hide. Among the Mandingo chiefs, the most industrious of the civilized Africans, the beds, divines, and sofas are heaps of mud, covered in untanned skins for cushions, while logs of wood serve as bolsters. I am in the opinion, therefore, that the immigrant slaves experience only very slight inconvenience from lying down on deck. But the ventilation is carefully attended to. The hatches and bulkheads of every other slaver are grated, and the apertures are cut about the deck for the ampler circulation of air. Wind sails, too, are continuously pouring steady draft into the hold, except during a chase, when, of course, every comfort is temporarily sacrificed for safety. During calms, or in the light of baffling winds, when the suffocating air of the tropics makes ventilation impossible, the gratings are always removed, and portions of the slaves are allowed to repose at night on the deck, while the crew is armed to watch the sleepers. Handcuffs are rarely used on shipboard. It is the common custom to secure slaves in barracoons, and while sleeping, by chaining 10 in a gang, but as these platoons would be extremely inconvenient at sea, the manacles are immediately taken off and replaced by leg irons, which fasten them in pairs by the feet. Shackles are never used but for full-grown men, while women and boys are set at liberty as soon as they embark. It frequently happens that when the behavior of male slaves warrants their freedom, they all are released from all fastings long before they arrive. Irons are altogether dispensed with on many Brazilian slavers, as Negroes from Ajunda, Benin, and Angola are mild, and unaddicted to revolt, like those who dwell from the Cape or north of the Gold Coast. Indeed, a knowing trader will never use chains but when compelled, for the longer a slave is ironed, the more he deteriorates, and as his sole object is to land a healthy cargo, pecuniary interests as well as natural feelings, urges, and the spiraling of mental. My object in writing this palliative description is not to extrapolate the slavers on their commerce, but to correct those who exaggerated stories that have long been current in regard to the usual voyage of the trader. I have always believed that the cause of humanity, as well as any other cause, was at least served by overstatement, and I am sure that if the narratives given by the Englishmen are true, the voyages they detail must have occurred before my day, or were conducted in British vessels, while Her Majesty's subjects are still considered the traffic lawful. As I reorder many scarcely a credit to such a large profit, I sojourn an account of the fitting of a slave vessel from Havana in 1827 and the liquidation of her voyage in Cuba. What we are looking at here in these first three are the expenses out. The expenses paid out for the voyage was $20,742. The expenses at home, including paying wages, amounts to $27,172.46. And then expenses in Havana bring them up to $39,980.46. Total expenses for the voyage was that 39,000 figure. But then if we look at the final page, we can see that their returns, this is returns is value of vessel at auction and the proceeds of 217 slaves. This is the sale of the vessel itself, the ship, and the sale of the humans, which totals to $81,419. When you take their total returns or profits, or total returns or money made, and you subtract the expenses or the money spent, you get a total net profit of $41,438.54.